2 plus 2 equals 4. It's science because it always works no matter who is doing it, where, or when. Medicine is an art form because every canvas is different. Not every patient has the same problem. One patient might need a square, another patient might need a circle. We know it's a square because it has 4 equal sides. It always has 4 equal sides. It's what square means. Now let's say you run out of square and you just start giving people circle and you're telling them it's square and they don't know any better because they're not a doctor. But do you have the same prestige that you would if you were giving them the correct shape? Now you're passing off a circle as a square. Really, it depends what you expect out of these. But you can build with square. You can add more squares and make a big square. You can't do that with circle. And that's why you can't rewrite or cancel the Hippocratic Oath and still call yourself a doctor. They're two different things, and we're using it to serve a purpose someone else expects. But every nation relies upon the authority of the doctor. The doctor is a stoic, a philosopher, a diplomat. It has been suggested that if we enforce the Hippocratic Oath, that mad scientists are going to torture little incest victims, and that comes from just not getting paid if someone's not sick, ultimately. So is socialism ethical? Well, it's from each according to his means to each according to his need. So we might not need a one big budget for all the A doctor works for a judge of some kind, or a priest, a bard, and we shouldn't expect every judge to command the same budget or have the same needs as one another. A judge in one place has a dire need of certain things that someone else can do without, and vice versa. And when you try to force them all to have the same set of tools, none of them works as well as any one of them might. So if you need medical assistance that's not available in your town, you have to go to another town. That's a fact of life. Our doctor simply doesn't have those resources, price we pay for our idyllic little hamlet. School shootings are not a fact of life. Why did we repeal Roe versus Wade? First, do no harm, or you're not a doctor. And it has been suggested that the Hippocratic Oath is blasphemy because it was originally written for Pangaea. Not Pangaea. For Panacea, Aesculapius, Apollo, Hermes. Why not swear to Jesus? Well, if you're going to change the name of the god, why not change first do no harm? Because the apostle Saint Luke was a biophysician with a diploma from the Great Library at Alexandria. So not only has it been done before, it was done in the presence of Jesus. The Hippocratic Oath is defense against terrorism. Without that oath of the philosopher, the gentleman, you don't belong here. This is a sacred place. So calling yourself a doctor without the Hippocratic Oath is charging people for the square and giving them the circle. Fine for now, as long as I don't know what's going on, but I can't build anything with it. And since I can't build anything with it anyway, we're a sitting duck for barbarian Islam. Arabic has the hashashin, the hash eater, hash dealer, opium dealer, and this is where we get the word assassin. First, do no harm, or you're not a doctor. You're at best a wizard in a lab coat. Talking to you, Harvard. This is the war on terror. There are no words for the atrocity of Vietnam, but what environmental factors brought those conditions about? What was there that wasn't before? The United Nations uses impasses, discrepancies, conflicts like the stalemate in Korea to impose itself on our diplomacy. They take our right to answer to it away so that they can manage the conflict. And it would be one thing if they did it responsibly and then surrendered it back to where it belonged. But no, they just hold on to it and they exploit it. It's a security breach. So Vietnam was ultimately a product of being forced to compete with this culture and also compromised by it. Repealing Roe versus Wade was a major step in the right direction. Now we just have to reinstitute the Hippocratic Oath. We will do it, and we will insist that everyone we do business with does it. Now we can rest assured that if you are attacked, that you were doing the right thing. There's not a whole lot of conjecture about whether you had it coming, because you already have a judge. And if you had it coming, that would mean he had it coming. And he would save us a trip long before it became necessary. It doesn't always work. It's not a perfect history, or someone would have noticed it before now. I just happened to notice because I got repeatedly crippled as a child, misdiagnosed, and denied appropriate health care, forced to fend for myself while heretics judge me, act like I have no right to survive. Everybody thinks everybody else is supposed to have the same thing as them. Like it's the same for everybody. It doesn't occur to them that the system's different sometimes. There's people out there who couldn't care less about you, your background noise for the real experiment, no matter how well-meaning or misguided or justified anyone has been in the course of this. There has always been those guys, and you're allowed to, with whatever degree of involvement, be optimistic or pessimistic, try to figure out why I deserved it, or how to escape from this and do something better, whatever. Like, there's something wrong with me. But those guys exist. So what I need you to do is swear the Hippocratic Oath. Every member of the federal government sacrifices some of their freedoms in order to protect our rights to life, liberty, and property. Why should we expect any less from a doctor? You belong to that judge. With that patronage, you have the authority to tell the police, get out of the way so I can save this person's life, or this is a situation, etc. But that's not what we have now. What we have now is just a convenient screen for terrorist activity. Our enemies want to deny us the Hippocratic Oath. They want to drag us down to their level. Well, how can we perform abortions? What about women's rights? The Catholics don't like abortion because they believe life begins at conception. The Jews are a little more forgiving. Life begins with the first breath, because there's no certainty anything can happen in 9 months. But when you declare war on the unborn, you're a coward. Those people have the resources we need, but we have no right to take that. But look what they're doing to us. So when someone says that you can't have abortions with the Hippocratic Oath, the fact is that the Hippocratic Oath does not specifically preclude surgical dilatation and curettage, DNC abortion, because what it does exclude is abortive unguents, chemical abortions, which at the time it was written were as likely to kill the patient as the fetus, whether administered by a doctor or not. You could still get them from any crone. It simply wasn't doctor business. It wasn't reliable. But anytime a life ends, and by the Catholic definition would be in vitro, you have to pay the ferryman. There has to be a death certificate with a name on it so they have something to mourn. Otherwise, you're sacrificing the you're sacrificing virgins, born or unborn, to God. And our God doesn't eat people. We don't do virgin sacrifice. And really, you have no say in the matter without the Hippocratic Oath. Anyway, it's a non issue. So we should have reconciled women's reproductive rights with the Hippocratic Oath. And it should have been um, far simpler. But the real issue was that Vietnam proved that we are nuts. We are unfit. We are unworthy to assert dominion over this land and its people. School shootings are not a fact of life. Our kids are under tremendous, overwhelming pressure from the marginalization of normalcy, the transgender movement. Poor white people in America are either gay or racist. That comes from Idi Amin, the last king of Scotland. The reason you have no say in the matter, like this protected class can just do whatever they want, and the minute you say something about it, you're a racist. That comes from there being a king overseas who says so. It was around the same time as Roe versus Wade that genetic science pinpointed the origin of genetic Eve in Africa, which makes sense because all hominids originate in Africa. And if the book of Genesis and the genetic record are both true, it stands to reason that genetic Eve must be the same person in both. But the idea that she was black in and of itself should not be offensive to a rational person. We just haven't exactly figured out technically how that worked. But the fact of the matter is, the Aborigines had to have seafaring to get to Australia. Southeast Asia was already populated, so the people who populated Southeast Asia came from Africa before the Aborigines. That means that Eve was not necessarily black. And what does this have to do with anything? Well, in certain circles that don't want you to have the Hippocratic Oath, in these circles, Islam is going to take over the whole planet. And it's not Afghani Islam or Turkish Islam or Arabic Islam. They all want that. But black Islam in Africa, see, Islam is the religion of God no matter where. They view human life as secondary to their agenda. Idi Amin was a tyrant, a terrorist, and a warlord. And making him the last king of Scotland basically gave holy writ to Central Africa to dominate all these little blonde kids. We have to have the Hippocratic Oath. And then the reasons that they took it away from us will have to be addressed. But we can't just throw our hands up and act like that's outside the realm of possibility. But we're going to go ahead and brainwash generations of Europeans around the world to think that they were born with the wrong genitalia. Like, that's okay, but revisiting Korea isn't. First, do no harm. And now, The Last King of Scotland was just a brilliant work of fiction. We don't have to rewrite history. It doesn't matter. We don't have to demand that the UN acknowledge that Idi Amin couldn't possibly have been a king of Scotland. It doesn't matter. First, do no harm, and then we can all get on with our lives. So genetic Eve probably wasn't black. That means the past 40, 50 years of black African inertia, the momentum with which they have expanded, was taken on false pretense. Do they care? What are you going to do about it? They're not going to correct their records. They're not going to go back through their books and, oh, how much do we owe you? And even if we could expect that sort of thing, it still wouldn't do us any good without the Hippocratic Oath. Because first, do no harm, or you are, by definition, not a doctor. And from the looks of you, you're not much of a mujahideen either. And think of it as not within the scope of your authority to ignore this, because this is the game you are playing at. As if we're just not allowed to analyze the problems that we face, but these people are allowed to just force all this undue influence on our children. We don't owe them that much money. Islam believes our ancestors escaped enslavement by theirs, and we are all born fugitives of a debt that can never be repaid. So even if we were all paid up, we would still owe them. The answer is to stop taking credit from certain people, scientifically define religion, and first do no harm, because we have to know that it's always okay to do what we do, to follow through. There's a few different things we could do. It is far more difficult to corral a rescue trained population with currency as cheap as terrorism. If a significant portion of the victims or those affected by a disaster run toward the explosions, it's kind of hard to cover things up that way. But ultimately, there are certain standards in democracy that can't be ignored. We can't just say, oh, well, we can't afford a jury trial, so we're just going to sentence people. I'm 44 years old, and I've had humanity's closest natural enemies following me around since preschool. Now, you let them do that to us, and then you let them steal so much money that you can't afford to muster a jury, but you're still in charge of us. First, do no harm, and then there will be a gray area where every expert professional physician has to appraise each case as it comes, as most appropriate, in the best interest of the patient. And if an abortion would increase the likelihood of a viable heir in the future, for instance, it was a threat to the mother in the meantime. Now it's a scenario where the abortion means an heir as opposed to losing the mother. There's no divine argument against that. You just have to furnish a death certificate. The school shootings are a symptom. They're not just an unchangeable fact of life. Like, it started with Roe versus Wade. What did we do to deserve that? The technology now exists to think along different lines. Certain parties would have found the temptation irresistible to just double down on the old way and wait for it to come back around. But the internet is such a powerful tool that if we don't invest, it may never come back around. If your networks are secure enough, you have no problem obtaining the old way. You can take or leave the old way as you see fit, but you can't just flood the streets with problems and hire more and more police and act like you can't afford to muster a jury. But the law, like, we just need to bear with that systemic ineptitude until the internet comes around. There were a lot of arguments for Roe versus Wade, why the Hippocratic Oath didn't hold water. One argument against abortion was that you might abort the second coming of baby Jesus. But was he resurrected because he was the Son of God? Or was he the Son of God because he was resurrected? You can't abort baby Jesus to come back to life. Some of these arguments were not fully thought out. They were postulated just to give people a distraction, a decoy from the real issue. Ultimately, the real issue is that Gandhi was not Hindu. The Rhodesians, for instance, have been oppressed on false pretense for over a century for ranging cattle. But do the Zulu not partake of the sacred cow too? Why didn't Babu say anything to them? So we have to recognize that Indian non-aggression is not the same as Swiss neutrality. All the way on the other side of Africa, there's a subcontinent that has the final say. There's just nothing we can say to argue that, you know, they aren't just conceding out of the goodness of their hearts. Ultimately, no matter how much you struggle and strive and innovate, there's nothing you can do about India. But Gandhi was not Hindu, so won't someone between Judea, Greece, Rome, England see reason? Well, it's just a fact of life. We're just gonna have to stand around uselessly while the third world turns all these little blonde kids gay so they can take the land beneath their feet. I don't know how many formerly decorated, combat rescue trained, practical comparative theologists you know. I'm the first one I'd ever heard of. But figure there's a reason that that came about too. I just basically described a blueprint to solve the 40-year plague of school shootings. Number one, if I can do that, what else might I be able to do? Number two, what have you ever done for this country? These people act like I have to run for president just to try to progress this agenda. Otherwise, I have no right to challenge our fate. Like they expected me to forgive all the nonsense they'd been up to behind my back all these years. But I swore a Hippocratic oath. First, I shall do no harm. And then the law is on my side. mfrodeo.blogspot.com, my first rodeo. I thought you'd be more excited. These are rough, unpolished. I don't want to say they're rough drafts because they were written with inspiration, but I lack the higher education of most professional theologists, so they could use a little polish. I didn't go to school for it. It was just a natural hobby because while the other kids were playing their first year of football, I was partially crippled with a misdiagnosis. So I studied literature, mythology, anatomy, and physiology. If you're an editor or something, some kind of hotshot, mfrodeo.blogspot.com, my first rodeo. If only Harvard would read it, fixed overnight. Why didn't I think of that? If you have paid attention for the past 23 minutes, you are probably on the clock, and you deserve far more, my friend. We should definitely pay the people who get paid to watch these videos more, because then maybe we could afford somebody who pays attention. Doctor is a very powerful word. It means a lot more than we give it credit for nowadays. It should be far more important, far more autonomy, and then that would take some of the pressure off of various sovereignties. The zombie apocalypse wouldn't even be possible. Fascist, collectivist. All these years we've had foreign kings exerting undue influence. Their attitude is that democracy is temporary. It's a temporary inconvenience, stupid. And what do we do but prove them right?